Additional data on American Maroons by Hebert Aptheker from the Journal of Negro History, Volume 32, Number 4, October 1947. Some years ago, the present writer called to the attention that the fact that existing Maroons, organized belligerent fugitive slaves, was not confined to the West Indies and South America, but was also a phenomenon characteristic of American slavery. Further evidence of a particular type of reaction to the Negro status of a slave is here represented for the state of South Carolina. Brief note was made in the paper previously cited of the fact that South Carolina and Georgia were in serious trouble in the 1780s by Maroons, some of whom had borne arms for the British in the Revolutionary War. A very early reference of the source of this behavior appears in a written letter of one William Reynolds Sr. of Charleston, dated December 12, 1783. This gentleman declared that his 30 slaves had left his service and followed the British General Provost's army from this state to Savannah and the state of Georgia, and from there, the greatest part of those, many other Negroes, followed the Creeks into the nation. Further light is thrown on the Maroon disturbances themselves in a period of several manuscripts. One, John J. Borkin Jr. wrote to Joaquin Harrison, a state representative from Perrysburg, on March 14, 1787, telling of serious depredations of armed fugitive slaves. Very recently, this letter stated that had taken provisions from his own plantation and wounded his driver. Mr. Brockman wondered that unless the state took immediate suppressive measures, the matter may become too serious in nature, as hereafter to give ourselves further trouble, and to make the matter more quietly submitted our families to be sacrificed by them, and probably by our own indoor domestics. The recipient of this quieting letter note wrote to the next day to his colleague from St. Peter Parish, Charleston, that South Carolina had to do something. Even if we follow the example of the Georgians by proclamation, so much for the head dead or alive. By the 20th of March, Governor Thomas Pinckney officially called the situation to the attention of the legislature and submitted pertinent letters describing this gravity. The next day, a joint committee of both houses reported that His Excellency, the governor, requested immediately to adopt the most decisive and effectual measures to expatriate the runaway Negroes committing depredations in the southern part of the state. It added its recommendation that the government be authorized to use a proclamation offering awards of £10 sterling for each Negro killed and taken in this state, and the legislature agreed to provide any assistance that may occur in the prosecution of this business. From the account of expenditures attending the dispersal of the fugitive slaves near Perrysburg, it appears that the state militia, assisted by Caba Indians under command of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Hudson, used up over $200 and £40 to pay for the business, of which £40 went to Captain Patton for scalps taken by the Cabas under his command, which totaled a number of £20 earned by Jacob Winkler and Nathaniel Taylor for the same tasteful trophies. Funds for this purpose were appropriated by the legislature at the end of February 1788. The resolution provided his special money, appears in interesting information that the militia is performing their duties as carried out into the state of Georgia. The evidence presents similar proceedings in the spring of 1793. Thus, there exists a request dated April 19th to the legislature for a payment of one Captain William Harley, an 18-man, who had been employed by order of the governor against the Negro fugitive. These men had required 15 days of performance of their task, and the captain received his money. In addition, there was a receipt of the same day acknowledging the payment of £30 to 22 other men, 2 sergeants and 20 privates, for 7 days in the service of an expedition against runaway Negroes. Captain Harley was a busy man this season, as demonstrated by the order upon the state treasurer assigned by Governor Moultrie on May 20th, 1793, to pay the captain $245 for himself and 12 men. This money was paid to compensate the labor of 13 individuals who, from the 29th of April to the 17th of May, were raised and sent in pursuit in a number of armed fugitive slaves in the parish of St. John's, St. James, Goose Neck, Goose Creek, and St. George. The petition of the state aid presented in 1800 by the widows of 2 overseers, Adam Cullicutt and Joseph C. Brown, that they both were killed in October 1799 by fugitive outlaws. It was possible that this accomplishment by the same group of Maroons, but it does not seem likely from the available evidence. Mrs. Cullicutt, at any rate, stated that her husband lost his life while a member of a group commanded by Captain Paul Hamilton in pursuit of a party of Negroes who had committed murder in the neighborhood of Jacksonboro. While Mrs. Brown declared her husband and another overseer were in search of a gang of runaway Negroes who infested St. Paul Parish, and both men were shot by these fugitives. In December 1825, at the cost of $700, the state of South Carolina purchased Mrs. Perwin of Richland County, her slave Royal, and freed him. This action was taken as a result of a petition from the previous year of 81 planters in the lady's neighborhood. It may assume that the extraordinary service of the master class will invoke such two tributes, and this assumption is correct. The petition's planner reveals it is somehow years later since Ford, a highly worthy and respected citizen of our state, was murdered somewhere not far from Georgetown, South Carolina, by a Negro belonging to Mr. Curl of Richland District named Joe or Forrest. A reward was offered by the fugitive of the deceased and by the governor of the state, but the rebel was not taken. The petition continues. He is so cunning and artful as to elude the pursuits, and so daring and bold in particular times when no force was at hand to put everything in the defense. Emboldened by his successes and seemingly good fortune, he plunged deeper and deeper into wilds of crime until neither fear nor danger could deter him, first from threatening and then executing a train of mischief we believe quite without peril in this country. Most of the runaways flew to his camp, and he soon became the head of their life. He had the art and the address to aspire euphemisms, such as his cunning, that but few of the enterprises of mischief planned by himself failed of success. We believe nearly 4 years have now elapsed since the murder of Mr. Ford, and that the whole time, until his mere death, was marked by crimes, by mischief, and by dissemination of notions that dangers among the blacks in a section of our country, such as were circulated in the end to produce insubordination and insurrection. We were compelled to conceive that the necessity of the case, associated together with the purposes of domestic safety and the object and pressing of our blacks, proper field by the power of the wholesome example. We organized several companies of infantry among our association. Yet, as the state planners, this force was unable to cope with Joe or Forrest and his followers. Here enters Mrs. Perwin's favorite slave, Royal, who recommended strategy by offering to trick the partisan and his band into an ambush for slaughters by the planters. Indeed, Royal managed to decoy those whom he had long sought. Soon perceiving their mistake and their danger all before them, they instantly attempted to defend themselves with a well-charged musket. But at a single well-directed fire from the party of whites and a boat of Joe, with 3 of his party fell dead. The rest of the gang of runaways subsequently were either killed in pursuit, or hung for attempted murder, or were frightened to their respective homes. Thus Royal did gain his freedom, of body if not mind. In December 1821, the state of South Carolina passed the act of increasing punishment inflicted upon the persons convicted of murdering any slaves. This law provided that any person did willfully, malice, or deliberately murder any slave, he, on conviction, shall suffer death without the benefit of the clergy. While if his killing was done on a sudden heat of passion, the penalty was not to be a fine over $500 and imprisonment not over 6 months. Mention of this made it a fact because on one of the forces producing the most revealing petition to the state legislature in 1829 from 23 planters of the parish of Church of Christ, District of Columbia. While they were calling for the repeal of the cited 1821 law, presented considerable evidence of Maroon activity. These slaveholders declared that from the vicinity of their property to Charleston, from the parish belonging to surrounded by navigable waters leading directly to it, occasioning much intercourse with that city, and from the great northern world passing through the parish and its long leaf. They are particularly exposed to great evil of absconding slaves and their ruinous depredations. They went on to say that, aware of these causes, we have long combined to produce this evil, but they are within the latter years only found it operating, inducing great irregularity and disorder among the slaves, and now leading directly to the state of insubordination and danger affecting the lives of individuals and the security of property. This state of things is operating, your memorialists believe, in every part of the lower and middle division of the state, as they are informed by the inhabitants of other parish and cries out loud for interference of your honorable house. They think it's unnecessary to say anything of increasing efforts by euphemisms out of Carolina. To poison the mind of our domestic people, they must be met in a different way. They cannot hurt us if the southern states are truly themselves, but they are distinctly state in their conviction and a great mischief have already been done. And daily, increasing by the misguided zeal and unguarded movements and acts of conservation of persons within our own states owning little or none property, they have earnestly so increasing crave to meddle with yet the living and supporting of the agriculture of the country. In developing and lynching and using anti-slavery feeling amongst the poorer folks of South Carolina, the planners went on to state that this is a dangerous and accident that have been occurring economic depression. They point out large bodies of Negroes have been sold to traders in Charleston because of this depression, and they follow an unrestrained recourse of these slaves with free blacks and low, worthless white people. And this infused in the mind of the Negroes great ideas of insubordination and emancipation, which they carried with them when sold in every part of the states. Returning to the law of 1821, the memorialists held that those who enacted it were not partial Southern planters nor Southern legislators, for they had been known to changing the nature of the penalties of the case of the Negroes by inflicting death and punishment for a white man killing a slave who was a property, instead of acting for the final loss of that property, while placing the white inhabitants on a footing which cannot be admitted by juries of our countrymen, and hence the penalty will never be inflicted in any case, however enormous. These plaintiffs asserted in their belief that every effective law is to reduce on part of the Negro of such acts of violence as his immediate vengeance upon him. Let us have, they begged, undutiful laws of our forefathers, for the old laws are practical and reasonable, and therefore carried in execution. This act of 1821 particular fitness is impressed upon the minds of the slaves, who too often read they are now different footing as regarded their owners and whites from what they formerly were. A footing approaching near to the state of emancipation from their authority leads to the course to the state of unrestrained liberty and licentiousness. While the provisions to tend to restrain the whites from dealing in this state is beneficial for fashion. This alleged condition of security in crime brings about greater and yet greater atrocities. Hence, the perpetration upon our property, crops, and cattle have been enormous. Such Negroes has the consequence of this combination of fatal circumstances remain out for years. At the length cease to respect whites and become reckless in the consequence of choosing their opportunities during the sickly season of the year when individuals are alone and supposedly defenseless and attack them with a view to destroy them. Let us continue these petitioners and cite a few examples to demonstrate the facts. In 1822, a Negro belonging to the estate of Spring absconded and came into the parish of Church of Christ as a runaway. In 1824, a fellow belonging to Mr. Lejeune, joined him as a runaway and was shot and killed in his company. In 1825, a family of 5 in number purchased at the sale of A. Vanderhouse, absconded and joined the same ringleader. They continued out until October of last 1828, when the children surrendered, one had been born in the woods, the mother and father being both shot and killed. In 1827, 3 Negroes belonging to the parish estate returned in a like manner after the sale of the effects as runaways. One of them in January last, 1829, snapped a gun heavily loaded with a slug at one of your memorialists, who met him in the woods and immediately shot the Negro. Another of these 3 Negroes in October last attacked one of your memorialists with a knife, 15 inches long, and stabbed him in the hand, and would have cut his throat, but the sisters rendered him in time to save him. In 1828, runaway slaves collected in various parts of the parish. One was killed on the spot, another took time and taken in. January, last 18 slaves of your property of the memorial went off on their driver, and one of these fellows had been shot and killed, while the house of the owner had been pillaged by his own slaves, 10 of whom are still out in the neighborhood parish. This condition is no longer tolerated or borne with. One Negro taken some months ago declared on his trial that he had 3 weeks to destroy 40 heads of cattle, and many of the memorials altogether prevented him from keeping stock of any kind. From these causes, after having large gangs of cattle, sheep, and hogs destroyed. This concludes the presentation of the material on American Maroons. It may be remarkable that one of the continuing presses for in his research and his response of the Negro to slavery, he began to take quite seriously and almost literally the characterization of that institution, which has become common among abolitionists, which almost are common against militant abolitionists like John and James Redpath, that, to quote the latter, slavery is a state of perpetual war. It is certain, this investigator is, that the ancient cliche is still reiterated, that American Negro slavery is characterized by plasticity, is a colossal hoax, and participating Adolf Hitler's technique of the big lie by several generations. So there you have it. So he's saying that slavery was a choice. People had to fight and fought about that. It's a colossal hoax. According to Herbert Aptheker, who wrote this, it's a colossal hoax of a big lie perpetuated by several generations. And as the militant abolitionists said, John Brown and James Redpath, to quote the latter, slavery is a state of perpetual war. We're not a docile people that took that stuff laying down. I always knew when I was young it was a lie. But because of this lie, it spawns other stuff. You know what I'm saying? That, we was aboriginal, that we was, other stuff. We Indians and stuff like that. No, we lived off the land. We survived. We did our own school African stuff. But, many people don't want to talk about that, nor do many people want to, describe that. But the main reason I found this out by forming a study group, which is mainly important because they're not going to teach you your history with all this information around. And there's a lot of falsified history, a lot of what Dr. Amos Wilson said, feel-good history. Well, anyway, much love. Like I said before, study, form African study groups. And subscribe to the channel because we're going to keep on pitching African history like this. You know what I'm saying? So subscribe and much love to all y'all. Peace.